like to call this meeting of the Bellingham City Council's Public Works, Public Safety Committee together. I'm Terry Borneman, Chair. Joining me on the committee is Michael Lilliquist and Jack Weiss. We have 3 items before us today. The first is an extension of the lease terms for the Bellingham Railroad Museum in the Parkade Building.
Thank you. Good morning. Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. As Terry mentioned, this first item has to do with a below-market lease in the Parkade Building. The city has had a relationship with the Railway Museum now for 11 years, and the council previously extended their lease through January of 2015. That was the last council action. So the current lease expires at the end of January. Before you is a new lease with the same terms for another 3-year period, and per the Bellingham Municipal Code, any lease agreements that are made at below market rate require council approval. So we brought this forward to the committee today for your direction. Included in your packet is a statement of the public benefit provided to us by the Railway Museum, and that is the requirement for below market lease arrangement is that there is a public benefit that is derived from the arrangement, and so the Railway Museum has identified some of the functions that they provide to the community and some information about their program, and I believe there's a representative today here from the Railway Museum if the council does have questions or the committee has questions. At this point, staff is just looking for direction to see if you would like to continue this relationship at the same arrangement in terms of rent, and if so, we'll move forward with that through the leasing agreement.
Okay. Committee? Jack?
So Ted, since the last time we did this particular lease, we also had the issue associated with the spaces next door to it, and we went through that entire exercise. What is the current status of our lease arrangements in the Parkade?
So the space immediately adjacent to the Railway Museum is currently being leased by the tourism and the Bellingham Partnership. There is one vacant space that we're still trying to find a market rate tenant for, and so we're working to do that. It is currently vacant though, but for the most part we have a good mix now in the Parkade with the exception of that one vacant space.
Okay. I don't know what kind of direction you're just. I personally don't have a problem with extending the lease the way it is. I think they've been a value to the community.
Yeah, and I think that's where staff is at this point. Last time around, we had extensive discussion because of the other proposal for the vacant space at the time. But at this point, it's an established relationship. We're not actively looking to lease that space. I mean, and so we anticipated direction from the committee to extend the relationship.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, I guess. Well, just to provide direction.
Yeah.
So provide direction that we would move to provide direction to prepare the necessary lease extension agreement under the same terms.
Okay. Michael?
I agree with extending our relationship with the Railway Museum. It's a great attraction for downtown, a good location for it, and I don't have any problem with the idea that they're paying less than market rate given what they're returning. I do have some questions about the municipal code and how it's understood. It's kind of a policy discussion on what market rate is, and I think this is maybe more for you, Matt. The code says that lease rates shall be market-based, and I'm wondering how that should be understood, because it's not clear to me that we have much of a market for these spaces in the sense that we often have a hard time getting one to move in. If we had a live active market, the market value would be the price of anything in an active market at equilibrium. When there's enough buyers and sellers, you get to the natural market price. Well, we don't really have that, so how do we determine that? It's also not the natural value, which is the price it costs us to deliver the service or the amenity or the good. So that's another market-based understanding of price. So I'm having understanding, I want to know how we understand market price. It seems like we're imagining what we think we might get for it rather than what we get for it. Have we had other bidders?
Well, I'll let Matt talk about the details, but we have 3 market-based tenants in the parkade now, and we know what they're paying.
Okay,
So it's not as if we don't know. I mean, we are charging 3 private businesses to lease the space in the parkade, and that's,
oh, I guess I'm misremembering. I somehow thought we gave some of those a below market rate, but those are actually market rate?
Yeah.
Okay. And so this estimated market rate is based on those immediately adjacent units or nearby units?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
correct.
Yeah, this is Matt, legal department. I've always interpreted market-based. It's a little bit different of a term than we usually see. Usually you'd see the fair market rental value, and I've always assumed that means the same thing, which assumes, you look at the market and what the market would value that type of a site at, and it's not precise, but here we do have some specific comparisons right in the same building to look to.
Yeah, I just remember a while back when we were having a hard time renting it at all, it was very hard to determine what the market price was if the actual price in the market was zero because we had no takers at that moment. We had kind of a vacuum of information. But yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot we were renting currently at market rate, so that's fine. I have no problem with this direction to staff.
Okay, yeah, and I agree too, especially this time of the year. This is always it's always a good time to take kids and stuff to the railroad museums, but as the holidays are coming, it's even a better time to take the kids to see the museum and displays there. It's just such a great place, and so I will agree as well. All those in favor of providing that direction to staff, answer aye.
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 Okay, we will recommend that tonight, and I know Mr. Knutson is definitely going to be voting for it, so yeah, we'll recommend that tonight. Great. Moving to our next item, it's the extension of the lease term for the Whatcom Symphony Orchestra in the former Federal Building.
Thank you. And this is another below market lease. This one's a little bit different in that the city is not actively pursuing commercial tenants for the Federal Building. So I think Michael's question is maybe perhaps more relevant for this item. And we do have, obviously, the U.S. Postal Service has space in the Federal Building, but that is the last tenant of the Federal Building aside from the Whatcom Symphony Orchestra. This lease was put together by the PDA, obviously working in conjunction with the city, and it was intended to be temporary in nature in that the city was pursuing renovations to the Federal Building with the ultimate goal of moving city staff and government offices into the Federal Building. But it's been, the Whatcom Symphony Orchestra has been there for 2 years now, and their lease expires at the end of January as well. And they're wanting to extend that for another 18 months. They have offered to increase their rent from $300 a month to $400 a month. And the question of fair market value, as I mentioned, is more challenging in this building. So we provided some additional fiscal information, not necessarily what comparable commercial space would lease for, because that was problematic in the Federal Building originally, but also our cost to maintain our city space. And the number that's before you is an average based on our average square footage cost for custodial maintenance and utilities. This is a fully serviced building, meaning that we provide custodial and maintenance service and pay the utilities. We also have a little bit more information on this one. The city is obviously pursuing a fairly major renovation in the next few months at the Federal Building, so it also raised the question of could we have a tenant there while we're undergoing construction, and what would the impacts be on the tenant and on the construction. So prior to meeting with the committee today, we met with the building official to make sure that we understood access issues during construction, and also with our project manager on the Federal Building. And both of those individuals felt that because of the relatively few number of people in this office space and the fact that we would continue to have access stairwell access to the 3rd floor during construction. They didn't see an issue with having them continue the lease through construction. So from that perspective, it was not a problem. So we are looking for direction again from the committee.
Museum. We put them in there first as that.
Yeah, we had originally, the mayor reminded me that when the symphony orchestra originally approached the city for some office space, we had asked them to work with the museum because there was already a bit of a relationship, and the museum stores some of the symphony orchestra's equipment, and so they did have an ongoing relationship, also located in the Arts Center. And as you know, the museum, or I believe you know, the museum's undergoing an analysis right now, kind of a business analysis, looking at the way they're structured, their operating procedures, kind of looking at how the museum could potentially do business in the future. And one of those outcomes may be the continued to pursue some relationship with the symphony orchestra and some co-location at the old museum. And I haven't had a chance, I have not had a chance to talk in detail with Patricia Leach about that prior to today, but I think that may be an ongoing tract as well, because at some point the city would envision needing the 2nd and 3rd floor of the federal building for city staff, other government offices. We went through that original analysis, as did the PDA, and determined that that was probably the highest and best use for the building. So the request here is for 18 months. We originally pursued a year extension, but the Symphony laid out some reasons, and we think they're valid reasons why a year didn't work for them, given their season and the challenges of moving offices a year from now. It really would need to be either a 6-month arrangement or an 18-month arrangement, just given their programming and how they do business. That particular time of year doesn't work for them. So this is an 18-month arrangement, and I think given that they've asked or they've offered to increase their rent and still keep it as a relatively short agreement, staff's comfortable with this agreement that's before the committee.
Mayor?
Yeah, and I think Ted and Patty and others have done a good job of looking at the building that we have now and understanding that we're not, going to be looking for market-based rent. We're going to be using it for government, but there's an interim time where if the space could be used, it's better to use the space than leave it empty. And since the symphony is already there, and since we're doing this assessment on the museum, another temporary extension of the lease, I think, with someone paying rent to the building is, even though it's below market rate, is a good use of the space rather than letting it sit empty. And we may be bringing other things like that to you, where there would be a good use of the space that we could temporarily use while we're in construction, because it wouldn't be obviously attractive to necessarily a commercial tenant or an office tenant, or not very many. So that's what we thought, is it's a use of a facility we have.
Okay. Michael?
I agree. It's a fine use of the facility for this interim 18-month period. I have no problem with renewing or making a new lease under the proposed terms. But again, I kind of have a sideways question, and it has to do with the costs of custodial maintenance and utilities for that tenant space. It's a really high estimate. And I go back to what I was saying before. One market way of determining price is the so-called natural value, the cost for you to produce and deliver. Oh my goodness, is it really almost $17,000? Is that mostly maintenance, or is that utilities?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a combination of maintenance, custodial, and utilities, but the way we came to that number, it is very much an average and not specific to the federal building. It really is the entire operating cost for the facilities fund divided by the square footage that we maintain. And the level of service provided at any individual building is quite different at times. And so it's not necessarily the most accurate way to portray the cost, but it is the number that we use. And an example is if you look at in Facilities Fund 530, all of the things that are contained in there, and that includes cost allocations back to the general fund, the city's ICAP, taxes that are paid, all of the costs that the facilities fund has simply divided by square footage, total square footage that we maintain. So it's not always representative of the actual cost at an individual building. For instance, some buildings have full-time custodians, both day and night, like the library. They have a custodian that's there all day and in the evenings. The federal building doesn't have that. They have someone that swings by at the end of the day to clean it up, but yet when we take that average across the board, the number looks higher than it actually is for that. So it's a good clarification. It's just the way we determine our square footage cost.
That really helps. But I guess my real concern is this going to be, it's kind of a funny building. I'm worried about how expensive it will be to operate and maintain, and I'm wondering if any intended improvements we're making for ourselves will address some of those operational costs, or is this just an artifactual number, as you say, divided across city operations, and I shouldn't worry about this number?
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about this number, but it's a good point. The building is probably won't be our most efficient building and to operate, although some of the improvements that will happen with this first phase of renovation will help that. The layout will be improved for things like heating and ventilation to hopefully get some economy. So, but I wouldn't focus too much on this number. It's really not that representative of the federal building itself.
Okay. So I would entertain a motion for direction.
I move that we provide direction to the administration to provide a new 18-month lease on the proposed terms to the Whatcom Symphony Orchestra in the federal building.
Okay, we got a motion before us. Any other comments? All those in favor, answer aye.
Aye.
All right.
Thank you.
3-0. We will recommend tonight. The last item before us is a interlocal funding agreement with Whatcom County for Slater Road and I-5 compact roundabouts.
Thank you. This is the result of meetings between Ferndale, the DOT, the county, the Lummi Nation, the port, and the Council of Governments. As I believe the committee's aware, there's been quite a bit of attention paid towards the Slater Road interchange over the last several years as development occurs both in Ferndale and in the north portion of the Bellingham, and the impact on that interchange that is just outside, well, quite a ways outside the city limits, current city boundaries, but within a portion of it within the city's UGA. And it's currently, or until very recently, it was an entirely uncontrolled intersection, meaning no stop control for folks going across Slater Road, stop control for on and off ramp or off ramp, and Pack Highway. But it has been operating during certain times of the day at PM peak, for instance, at a level that fails, causing backups potentially onto the main line of I-5, and that really is the major concern, that people getting off northbound on Slater or southbound on Slater would back up into the main line. So DOT's been paying particular attention to it over the last year or so and came up with the concept of what they call compact roundabouts. They really do look more like a traffic circle than the roundabouts we're used to building, or even the DOT's been building on their main facilities. They're very small, but intended to control the intersection rather than going to an all-way stop, which can be problematic for most of the day where you have heavier flow on one direction than the others. This allows traffic to move fairly freely. If any of you have been out there, they're actually constructed already. So this interlocal agreement is coming to you after the construction has been completed. The way the arrangement worked in the proposed interlocal is the state designed and managed the construction of the project. The county is the primary funder. The total construction costs, so total cost of improvements, are around $350,000. And in the interlocal agreement you have, it does show the breakout, which is Whatcom County paying $257,000, the Lummi Nation agreeing to pay $70,000, Bellingham $10,000, and the agreement before you has Ferndale paying $5,000. Since this went to the agenda, since the agenda was printed, Ferndale has agreed to pay $10,000. So the city of Bellingham and Ferndale will both be contributing $10,000, assuming that this is passed by our respective councils. The numbers were a negotiated number. They're not necessarily based on percentage or traffic flow, although we've done quite a bit of modeling related to the development in North Bellingham there, and understand the impacts from development along the West Bakerview corridor folks using Pack Highway and using the Slater Road exit, and it's primarily folks coming from the north, getting off at Slater, and coming down the Pack Highway frontage road to Bakerview. So we believe it's a fair dollar amount, the $10,000, and we continue to work through this multi-jurisdictional group, not only at Slater Road, but also at Bakerview for future Bakerview improvements, and the entire group working through the COG is looking at the larger picture, which is the Bakerview to Grandview study area. So I believe it's been good cooperation amongst the jurisdictions, and staff recommends approval of this.
Kelly?
There have been a lot of discussions at COG about regional cooperation. I think it would be nice if there was more than maybe what we've had in the past. So what I see for the investment that we're making in these, we're also looking at our northbound ramp onto Bakerview and how we're going to get, as Ted said, that whole region of traffic alleviated. And it's not going to be just Bellingham that can do it or just somebody else. But obviously, if we alleviate traffic on Bakerview, we're helping the whole county, not just the city. So I think this is a very realistic investment to make, to be part of that regional partnership. And I think it's probably appreciated that that the city of Bellingham's transportation expertise is part of this endeavor.
Committee?
So I also strongly recommend that we adopt this.
Jack?
So, Ted, on the Bakerview interchange improvements that we did recently, about how much did that cost, and how much did we contribute to the overall cost?
The total cost was, I want to say, $3.2 million, and the funding partners, the port contributed $500,000, and that was part of an agreement based on their improvements in port property and their industrial lands there. The county, $100,000. We had significant grants. The biggest funder was TIB, so we had Transportation Improvement Board, state gas tax money, and the city paid the balance. Fred Meyer also contributed $100,000, and so it was a good mix of funding. The state did not have any money in the construction, but the state did the value analysis on that. So the state's money, similar to this one, the state's money was in the planning and design, pre-design, but the county's portion was $100,000 of the West Bakerview.
Any EDI money?
EDI, thank you, Michael. EDI was a big funder on that. So both grant, EDI was $750,000. There was $350 in a loan and $300 in grant. That's not right. The math's not right, but it was in that ballpark. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess where I'm leading with that particular question is that the reason why these roundabouts are necessary on Slater has more to do with not much what we have done as the city of Bellingham, but really what Ferndale has done as far as their growth around the La Bounty and rural Avenue area, and also on the other side of the freeway, all of the industrial improvements that have happened between Axton and Slater, to the point of what type of traffic actually is generated by new businesses between Slater and Bakerview on Pack Highway. Hardly anything has actually developed there, and so I'm just a little concerned that we're somehow looked at as being being tapped for funding, even though we didn't cause the problem. We're not causing the future problem either. And yes, we're supposed to be acting cooperatively because this is, two of the three roundabouts are 50% in our UGA areas, and 50% outside of the UGA areas. I just, to me, it seems like it's nice that Ferndale is kicking up their contribution from 5 to 10, but quite frankly, they're the ones that caused this entire situation in the first place.
I think it's actually a good point in that the current conditions, that very little come from the city, and that is recognized by the group that for instance, before we even started some of the proposed development in the north end there along Bakerview, which has been the point of discussion there just north of Bakerview, Slater currently, without any of that, fails at PM Peak. So it's, and of that, it's very little traffic coming from Pack Highway that's causing it. It is the Slater Road traffic and the on and off the interstate going to Ferndale or coming from Ferndale. And that's been recognized by the group, that the city's contribution here is much more about future development and the impact of future development in Bellingham on the interchange, not so much existing conditions. And I do agree, it's good that Ferndale has upped theirs to the same as the cities. And it is also fair, I think, that the Lummi's percentage is much higher because it is a lot of development that will happen there. And again, some of that is based on future stuff, as well as the jail and the county, and so some of the impacts. But your point is fair. Current conditions is not a lot of traffic from the city, and that's all been modeled and agreed to by the regional transportation planners, that our contribution is more for future impact.
But the whole idea of that Bellingham, or our commercial developments off of Bakerview will contribute to Slater Road, to me it seems speculative as to what the real impacts are, especially if we do end up providing for a northbound ramp, which would really allow for a lot more traffic flow over the bridge. To me, it seems like, will Ferndale go and help with that?
Well, we're certainly going to ask that the region contribute for Bakerview, and we did model. When we modeled, and I say we, I mean it's actually the private developers, and we reviewed the models for all the proposed development along the corridor, the Bakerview corridor. They did attribute a certain number of trips to Slater and Pack Highway, and we sat down. I think the process was a good one. Chris Como got all of the regional transportation planners together prior to the studies even being done, and we talked about trip distribution, and the group, which included the county, the state, Lummi, Ferndale, even WTA and the port, we all sat down and said, as we undertake these transportation models, we need to understand where the trips are coming from. We had a lot of data, and we did attribute some trips through the Slater interchange to Bakerview. It is a relatively small percentage, I would agree with that, and also we're talking about, for the most part, existing trips. They're already in the system. They're just being redistributed, right? They're going from potentially a Costco on Meridian to a Costco on Bakerview. They're not new trips. People are already going to the Meridian site. But we did look at the distribution. We had some really good data. I can't remember the percentage, but there is a percentage, and Chris would know it off the top of his head, that does come through the Pack Highway Slater interchange.
One last question.
Yeah.
Has there been traffic counts of northbound Pack Highway to the freeway, just to see what type of Canadian traffic or Blaine traffic was considered in the whole mix? Yeah.
So they've got existing volumes and they've got projected volumes based on not only there's quite a bit of proposed development that's in the, I'd say, in the pipeline, meaning that the developments have already been submitted at least through pre-application, and so the future traffic modeling and analysis had to consider these already in the pipeline as though they're existing trips. And so we know the impact on the frontage on Pack Highway. We know that at some point, Pack Highway, if you're on Bakerview, right now you can take, if you're eastbound, you can take a left onto Pack Highway. That's soon going to be restricted, and so we even modeled that. What will happen when Pack Highway becomes right in, right out only? Because as development continues to occur along the Bakerview corridor, we won't be able to allow people to make that left. And so all of that was considered fairly detailed modeling when there's been 4 or 5 different consulting firms working through the city, private developers, the port, things in Ferndale, the county jail site, all of that working together to say what's going to happen when all of this development, and it's significant when you look at Ferndale, North Bellingham, and the jail site, what's the impact on Slater Road? All of those, even under the most severe conditions, said that Slater Road will probably function even through the 20-year period without anything as major as like a two-lane roundabout or some of the things you may have heard proposed, and potentially would even function with a signal even after this is all constructed. But during current conditions, and that's what's before you today, it said that it should probably be an all-way stop. And so the DOT looked at that and they had concerns about an all-way stop right there because it really is so, it's so dependent on the peak. I mean, you've got a lot of times where you can go out to Slater and it's operating very well even now with no stop control on Slater. But when you go at the peak, you need something. So rather than putting in the four-way all-way stop, they said, let's go with these compact roundabouts, which we have no experience with, but the DOT's put one in down in Burlington and been happy with it. So the other thing is this will be a nice experiment for the region to say, how well do these work as kind of a interim step to a fully signalized or fully built roundabout.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying with this, that we're not contributing as much, but considering we're putting in 10,000 as opposed to a much larger amount, and the need for future as well as regional cooperation and understanding that it's a regional areas contributing to some of these the problems and should be the funding of it, you know, it's not something I can't approve. So it's something I can definitely approve with this, but it's important to make those points. Michael?
I agree, this is a small amount, and therefore I have no problem with it. But I would like to ask what the county's source of funding is, because we are a large part of the tax base for the county. I think we're already contributing, that is, our citizens are already contributing to that tax base. We're probably already, I'm going to guess, anywhere 30-40%, depending on whether it's sales tax or property tax, is, you know, Bellingham-derived income to the county. So, I mean, we already pay our fair share, our citizens do.
I'll check with Frank. I'm assuming it's their road fund, but I don't know that.
If it
So
comes
it's a
from,
road fund, that it's not that way.
not, yeah, it doesn't come from the city.
Okay. That would make a difference. Again, this is a small amount, but in general, you know, Bellingham residents do contribute to the tax base, except for the road fund. And so when they are using those funds, sort of we've already paid, if that was the case.
I'll have that information for you tonight.
So I will entertain a motion to recommend authorizing the contract.
I'll reluctantly move that.
Okay. Okay, we got a motion before us. Any other comments? Jack and then Michael.
I've driven on those roundabouts, and they do work, and it's a much cheaper alternative to the $2.5 million projects that we do in the city. And you know, they're not for every intersection in the
Right.
city, but it's something that we should really consider, especially for new construction, or if we're going to be blowing out, if we're going to do a lot of renovation on particular streets. It's not a bad idea, and it doesn't seem to take very much real estate.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the key. I mean, you don't need right-of-way. You can build them within the existing footprint, so you don't have stormwater issues. Yeah, we're interested to see how they work, and we'll be watching closely to see if it could be an application we could use in some of our intersections.
It'd make them a little bit more aesthetic, but, you know.
Michael?
That is actually my same comment. I drove them and I was kind of surprised. They're ugly, rudimentary little things. They looked a little bit slapdash, but it seems like for three of them, they're a little over $100,000 a piece. That's 1/10 the price of the full meal deal.
Yeah.
Are we potentially still down the line? Are we still looking at a larger, fuller roundabout as our 20 or 10-year plan?
Yeah, so there's been several studies that have looked at what is the ultimate improvement needed at that interchange, and it has been, I think, suggested that it would be a full roundabout, and those would be replaced with full roundabouts, potentially even two-lane roundabouts. But it is very challenging to say because we don't fully understand the land use out there. There's, you know, with the tribal-owned property, until we understand the land use, and that's part of the challenge, and one of the things that we're trying to get included in the Bakerview to Grandview study is we need to know what the ultimate land use is, what the trip generation would be. All of the jurisdictions are wanting to make sure we're on the same page there, because if it's a high trip generator, these may not last very long, and we'd have to go to either a signalized intersection or a roundabout. And hopefully more information will come out of this study that should be completed first quarter of next year.
Can you remind me what the ourselves and the other members of the COG have requested as one of our priority funding items for Slater Road. Is that for the 3 bigger roundabouts maybe in the future as most of the project, or only a small part of that project?
Yeah, I think the, of the 5 priority projects or 4 priority projects, I believe the big roundabout projects are no longer in there. And what's in there now is what they're calling the Slater Road connection, which would be an east-west from, where it tees at northwest, some connection through over to Aldrich or wherever that goes.
So I think it was $20 million. Now it's
was.
cut to 14, and that's because we've taken out the big roundabouts that are getting by with these compact roundabouts.
Yeah, and more study needed on what the ultimate solution would be. But the Slater improvements for now, the big ones, I don't believe they're on the 5-year list. No, took them off. So the focus is on Northwest and Slater, and in fact, if you've been out there, you see that that's recently been converted to an all-way stop. Northwest used to have the through, unobstructed through.
Yeah.
They put in stop there because, again, during certain hours, there's not sufficient gaps.
5 minutes late to the soccer game.
That's right, and so that is identified as a full roundabout at some point, and then a connection over. And one of the things that is being considered, and the timing is good because everybody's looking at their comprehensive plans. What is the strategy for the east-west connection? Kelly Road, Klein Road, the Slater connection. We're also looking at West Horton in the city's portion and a West Horton in the county's portion that would take Horton from where it terminates in Cordata all the way over to Northwest, which would be a great connection to eventually the Slater interchange. So all of that's being considered in this Baker v. Grandview study.
I'd like to get us over to Meridian eventually, too.
I'm sorry,
I'd like to get us over to Meridian eventually as well. And
right.
from there, we're all the way to across the county. Thank you.
Okay, we got a motion before us. All those in favor, answer aye.
Aye.
All right, so we will recommend approval tonight. The committee's adjourned.